During the 1968 presidential campaign, Richard Nixon promised to end the war in Vietnam and obtain peace with honor. Yet nearly 1 year into his first term, he was having little success. Peace talks between the North Vietnamese, supported by the Soviet Union, and the South, supported by the United States, had devolved into little more than sitting at a table with the North Vietnamese saying that they could wait until the chairs rot. Frustrated, Nixon decided it was time to use his secret weapon, his own reputation as a violent and unhinged rabid anti-communist who wasn't afraid to drop a nuclear bomb or two. Developed from game theory and a key tactic of his early administration, the plan was to scare the hell out of the other world leaders to get them to do what he wanted. Called the Madman Theory, it depended on possessing a massive nuclear arsenal, then simply acting sufficiently erratic and unbalanced to convince people that you were crazy enough to use it. This reputation was, at least in part, carefully crafted by Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger. As Nixon told his then aide, H.R. Haldeman, later Nixon's White House chief of staff, who ultimately spent 18 months in jail for his role in Watergate, "I call it the Madman Theory, Bob. I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached the point where I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word that, for God's sake, you know Nixon is obsessed about communism. We can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has this hand on the nuclear button, and Ho Chi Minh himself will be in Paris in 2 days begging for peace." A common example from game theory demonstrates how this works. Two people, chained together, are placed at the edge of a cliff. As soon as one says uncle, both will be released, but the other guy, the guy who held out the longest, wins a big prize. One implementing the Madman Theory would try to bluff his opponent into thinking he may just jump off the cliff by inching closer, dancing and walking near it, and just talking crazy. If he is sufficiently convincing, the other will yield. Unfortunately for Nixon, it soon became clear that the strategy wasn't working on the North Vietnamese. Thus, instead, Nixon decided to try bluffing North Vietnam's benefactor and chief military supporter, the Soviet Union. Beginning on October 10, 1969, Nixon ordered the Strategic Air Command, SAC, to prepare for battle, while Kissinger engaged in a campaign of all sorts of signal-type activity around the world to try and jar the Soviets and North Vietnamese. Called Giant Lance, on October 27, 1969, the operation launched 18 B-52 bombers, each armed with nuclear weapons, toward the eastern border of the Soviet Union. Unbelievably reckless, the bombers even required mid-air refueling, a procedure that posed the risk of the aircraft colliding and dropping their nuclear bombs at the border, something hardly advisable in such tense times. Note that this actually happened once, with the US accidentally dropping some nukes near a town. We've got more on that in the bonus facts in a bit. In any event, halting at the edge of Soviet airspace, the nuclear-laden bombers prowled the skies for 3 days, taunting Soviet aircraft that had been launched in response. On the diplomatic side, Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev sent the Soviet ambassador to the US, Anatoly Dobrynin, to meet with Kissinger and Nixon. At this meeting, Nixon continued with his madman ploy, lashing out and even threatening the ambassador, who reported to Moscow, "Nixon is unable to control himself even in a conversation with a foreign ambassador." Believing they had achieved their goals, on October 30, 1969, Nixon recalled the bombers and ended Giant Lance. He and Kissinger were convinced that this sudden reversal of tactics only reinforced his madman image in the eyes of the Kremlin and enabled the arms deal that followed on its heels. Just a little over 2 weeks later, on November 17, 1969, formal talks for limiting nuclear weapons began in Helsinki, Finland, and 2.5 years later, on May 26, 1972, Nixon and Brezhnev signed an interim strategic arms limitation treaty, SALT, and the Anti-Ballistic Missile ABM Treaty. And now for a bonus fact. On January 17, 1966, at around 10:30 a.m., a B-52G bomber collided with a KC-135 Stratotanker, accidentally dropping its payload of 4 nuclear bombs, 70 kilotons each, near the fishing village of Palomares, Spain. Bit of a whoopsie-doodle. The B-52G had been attempting to refuel from the KC-135, but came in too fast. Normally, if a collision might appear to be imminent, the boom operator on the refueling tanker is supposed to notify the other plane to break away immediately, which they will then do. However, in this case, for whatever reason, the boom operator said nothing, which ended up costing himself and the rest of the Stratotanker crew their lives as the B-52G collided with the refueling boom. This resulted in the KC-135's fuel payload exploding and the B-52G breaking apart shortly thereafter. It also resulted in 3 of the 7 aboard the B-52 bomber dying, with the other 4 managing to parachute to safety. One of them managed to make it to land, but 3 of them landed in the sea and were later picked up by fishing boats. Aside from losing 2 aircraft and the destruction of 4 nuclear bombs valued at around $2 billion each, according to the Secretary of Defense's valuation at the time, the area around Palomares was also subjected to high levels of ionizing radiation. While the nuclear bombs didn't detonate fully, the traditional explosives, the high explosive igniters in the bombs, did detonate with 2 of the bombs when they hit the ground. This resulted in their core radioactive materials being spread about in the air and contaminating an area of around 1 to 2 square miles. The 3rd bomb was found mostly intact in a riverbed nearby. The 4th was significantly harder to locate due to the fact that its parachute had deployed, and so they presumed it had landed somewhere in the Mediterranean. After 80 days of searching, it was finally located, and after a botched first attempt at recovery resulting in them losing it again for a time, it was successfully recovered. Interestingly, salvage rights for this were claimed by a man named Simo Orts. This customarily grants the locator of the item 1 to 2% of the value of that which was found. Given that the bomb was valued at around $2 billion, Orts asked for the lower 1% amount of $20 million. It isn't known how much he actually ended up getting, but the Air Force did eventually settle with him, paying him an undisclosed amount of money. Incidentally, one of the divers who was working on finding and recovering the missing nuke, Carl Brashear, lost his leg when it was crushed in an accident during the search. Apart from being an important event for the unlucky Carl Brashear, this was also the inspiration for the movie Men of Honor, starring Cuba Gooding Jr., Robert De Niro, and Charlize Theron. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Do not forget to subscribe. Also, why not check out another channel I do called Geographics? I'm going to link to that below. And thank you for watching.